Great games at your table. I'm Jonathan Albin. This is Nikos RPG, and today we're going to have a little bit of a conversation about character building. Now, I'm not promising the world, but I am going to say that what I've got to say isn't what you expect. So stick around to the end because it's going to be pretty crazy in our conversation today. Now, before we get started, make sure you go down below and press all the buttons so that the algorithm knows that you're part of our audience, and let's get after it.
Absorbing damage is the name of the game. From the claws of monsters or the heat from a ball of flame, or strength in numbers is a roll of the dice.
Alrighty, so we're going to be talking today about character building, but I'm actually talking about the deeper definition. If you think about it, the idea of building one's character really is talking about how one gets better at being a good person and developing your personality, your skills, and your ability to communicate in a more rapid and more efficient pattern. So we're going to be looking at each one of these subjects in a point-counterpoint sort of way. We're going to be speaking of the introspection, what it is we actually are facing in our character build, so to speak, what it is that we're wanting to change. And also we're going to be talking about the counterpoint, and that is how much of it's really necessary and how much of it is just simply bloat. And we're going to be talking about how to really fine-tune the process to make the game bring you to where you are getting more out of it. Now, as a game master with 50 years of experience, literally behind the shield since 1974, I have watched many players rise to the occasion, become better players, and I'll go through some of those specifics as this day goes along. But it also is going to be a situation where sometimes people just simply don't find themselves measuring up and simply call it quits and end their progression, either completely quitting the game or moving on to other things that appeal to their personal appetites. And of course, that's okay too. But we're going to really be drilling down and talking about the building of personal character along the way. So where we're going to start is right at the beginning, and that is the very basic block, what's known traditionally as the stat block. And we're going to talk about how the development of the character's attributes has changed over time and how those character attributes end up being not at all what they were originally, and actually fundamentally were compromised over the time of the development of Dungeons and Dragons in particular. Now, as a game master with as many titles as you can imagine behind me, I've seen a lot of different processes and a lot of different philosophies about these attributes, and I think you'll see where I'm coming from as we go along. So, the very concept of attributes in the case of Dungeons & Dragons, a character's strength, intelligence, wisdom, dex, constitution, charisma, arguably their hit points, arguably their saving throws. These numbers are attributes, provide a framework, a structure, if you will, for the building and the developing of the character. As a matter of fact, in the original concept of the character attributes, number one, these numbers were intended to be random, and the building of a persona, the creation of a character, was rolling of 6 numbers in sequence and then just playing with them as they were, literally letting the dice roll where they may, and then working with those numbers to determine what character, class, race, species, whatever. By grabbing a hold of them by a random mechanism, you are providing the universe, so to speak, to give you a measuring stick for your persona, that is. So when that was the original case, people would have a certain affinity for a set of numbers or a certain style of play, and they would then hold onto that particular stat block concept. Now, as time went on, you went from first edition to second edition and third and so on. Each of them performed the creation duties in different ways, and the players' interaction with those numbers changed. I can remember building out blocks and blocks of character stats and then choosing which one I wanted to play, because I was starting to do the same thing everybody else was, and that was moving from playing the character as created and creating the character that I wanted to play. And that slow transition from build a character and play what the numbers mean, driven slowly towards building what I want to build and what I want to play, simply became mundane, came routine, and the very concept of the core values changed. Add to that they realized at some point in game development that it was kind of, they believe or perceived of it being a cool way to do things to allow you to advance those numbers, granted by rather extreme measures. And I recall initially they had no way to change your attributes. But over time, they developed things like the deck of many things, or different tomes or books that could raise or change, or alter your base attributes. Until in the third edition, I should say. Pardon me, that's a word. Sometimes I don't even, This concept of change became so normalized that by the I think it was 3.5, or it could have even been the newest 5e, that allowed you to actually automatically choose to, you could choose to use a regular attribute, leave your attributes alone, and take feats that would advance a particular ability. But eventually it came down to where you could simply choose to increase by any one of your base stats by one by choice. And therefore, a character could theoretically move all of his numbers eventually towards 18, 18, 18, 18, 18. And that was by choice. There was a mechanism for that. Now, this issue really was one of framework, and were you looking at your original numeric values as a launch pad point, or were you looking at it as a skeleton or a framework for all of your existence? And there are philosophical differences between those 2 points. In the case of someone looking at their attribute values as a skeleton, they look to overcome their weaknesses and look for ways to mollify the particularly bad rolls if they were even facing them. I do know that by the time you get to 3.5 and Dungeons and Dragons 5e, you are now to the point where those numbers are malleable, and they are almost expected to increase over time. And personally, I have a problem with that, only because it doesn't fit into my perspective. The idea that a person can improve themselves is certainly true, but whether or not you can ever overcome the physical limitations of who you are is problematic, because if you do and can change those things, then why is it that most people fall into this middle ground? Why aren't we all especially when you get to middle age and above, why are we not all superior beings with, high attributes across the table? Yes, they are improved. There may be ways to improve an individual attribute a little, but does that mean you get a fundamental change to the mechanism when all of the steps are fundamentally locked in as a framework tool? What this really means in terms of play, and I don't want to go into the details of it, but what this means in play is that when you can actually change that which you are at the core, then are you anything real? Is there anything to you that is constant? And so this perspective really is a matter of how you want to build your character. Now, again, when we're talking about whether changing you as a person, by choosing to play a game where you have character attributes that can be set as an anchor, it does give you a framework by which to build your advancement over time. Not in actual changes to those numbers, but by interaction with and protection of your capabilities within that action. So let's not talk next about the secondary things. Certainly you've gotten your attributes down and they become a skeleton for your creation. But now when we talk about developing your character, this also means developing the type and size and method of your advancement. And so that necessitates talking about the concept of species or race. And when we slice off and I don't know, slice off, that's probably a bad word, probably a really bad idea, but when we drill down into the core of these racial differences or these species differences, there are characteristics, traits, or indeed the term marks that identify one species from another so that you can say that is definitely a dog versus that is definitely a cat. That's definitely a wolf or whatever. And by having these, then the question becomes, are we building in to the game mechanism something, again, that can be altered, changed? Or are we setting a framework, an external definition for these things? And when we therefore look at what is the difference between one race and another, there are those who will look at the attribute list and say, well, obviously, by the very, very size definition, a bear or an elephant is a much more massive thing and therefore has much higher, physical relative strength, just simply because of the number of muscles that it has and the amount of mass that it has involved in those areas. So does the building of a persona really come down to what makes the best number connection? What is the best sequence? What today's terminology, what is an optimized build for each of these? And the question becomes, are we building the persona for the purposes of being a winning combination, or are we building the persona so that it is a compelling character? And when we talk about, again, the very building of a character, it really is a matter of perspective in coming to the table to play the role-playing game. So if we are looking at a game that has a lot of crunchiness to it, a lot of sophistication to it, then by necessity, you're almost compelled to build to spec, so to speak, to build the optimal winning combination. But this is problematic because if you were creating a story-based role-play game, then these beneficial modifiers that you can perceive by choosing this species over that species now starts to create a leverage system that is rewards-based. You're not building for example, an elf to be an elf. You're building an elf to be optimized for better seeing, perhaps better hearing capability, perhaps better stealth capability, and so on and so on. And by creating these racial differences, the game master or the story designer actually has to go to the point of deciding, is what he's creating supposed to be played like this? Are we trying to make it so that there are winning combinations? And there are those in the modern iteration of role-play games, modern Dungeons & Dragons and some of the others. You build a specific species for a specific objective and in the process try to give the players what they're looking for in terms of these checkmarked improvements. But from a character, again, the personality building of the player, is this being done to make it so that it's easier for you to rack up victories? Is it being done to give your persona a specific flavor? Or are you just simply looking for a numeric advantage in all forms that you can find it? And when you provide these as part of the species change, are you not interrupting or altering the very framework in which your players are following their pursuits? So it really does become a matter of choosing to think how you're playing the character, how you're building the character, and how you are building your future within the RPG game. I know this sounds really deep and really, I realize I'm putting a lot of external pressures on this, but the reality is that many game masters have a story to tell that has these kind of deep agendas, and look for personas that will appreciate the depth to which they are becoming involved. Next, we come to the concept of the player's soapbox, the player's identity. I didn't realize I left him here. Go away. I will leave the other one, but I'll take that one out for now. That'll surprise you. All right. So, in the discussion of character class, character course, or career, as you may recall, I've done a video before, and I'll put a link on this page right about here to talk about the very concept of character classes and where they originated and how they came to be in Dungeons and Dragons. And they were initially simply a mechanism for appropriating or associating the different types of units in a wargame model into a tabletop role-playing game. But that soon changed into the class distinctions. And these class distinctions became fundamentally boundaries or barriers. Each of the choices you made as a character building into a character class were by themselves automatic blocks to other skills that you may or may not have been able to take otherwise. So if you chose the path of the cleric, for example, path of the healer, then you were going to be precluded from, say, special knowledge about how to do magic or how to climb into a second story window. It was intentionally made so that the character identification would be more clear and the framework for the person's existence would be defined, so that when a group was being built, when an adventuring band was put together, you would cover all of the bases, so to speak. But really the question becomes, in terms of building character, are we doing this, are you choosing the class simply to check off a box someplace? Are you doing it to get the, quote, optimized list of skills that you want? Or is there another purpose? One of the fundamental reasons why multi-classing that used to be very common in Dungeons and Dragons completely disappeared in the fifth edition is because the class benefits were a plus minus. If you wanted to purchase a level in a certain class, you were automatically precluded from reaching your optimal level within the class that you started. And so therefore the boundaries became fundamentally unbearable because you couldn't achieve them. You were limited to the class choices that you had to make. Of course, this led to the game taking increasingly longer and longer periods of time to build your individual character, to the point where, if I recall correctly, I think that it estimates that a D&D character takes about an hour and a half to create, whereas other games mechanics are much quicker because they don't have these restrictions. Now, these boundaries can actually make for compelling story play if you are, again, building your personal character by playing your persona within that framework with intention. But this is not always the case, and by realizing that these are fundamentally limitations you can pursue just as dedicated a course without these frameworks, simply by making the decisions about how you want to accomplish the skills you're looking for gaining. Boy, I left a minute in here all over the place. I thought I took these bad boys out. Nope. I'll explain them all at the end, why those images were there, but I will be leaving one of them. So it's a matter of what I had in my head versus what I actually did. But okay, so now we're going to talk about the Adventure Games group. When you put together a group of players, they are going to become integrally connected. And then it's a matter of, are you embracing this group as an identified band, a group, a gang, a guild? How are you classifying them in terms of the stories that you're creating? And by having a concept of this that defines itself, it means that the group can actually define itself. And as my line says here, these are the ties that bind. The idea is that when you put together the group, it's a matter of their internal perspective on what they really are to each other and for each other. And embracing and playing into this is really a way to build the character of your group, because they are no longer seen as individuals. They are seen as the merry band, the unsung heroes, however you want to perceive them. But this gives, therefore, the players the ability to really expand and grow. And I have found that allowing the players to define themselves, but recognizing within the communities that they travel that they are indeed a unit, tends to give great opportunity for mixed messages and confusions that can be added into the game to give it more depth and more gravitas than it might have otherwise. So have the players actually really consider what their reason for hanging out is and what they intend to do. Now, the Nikos RPG mechanism does include the idea of the injunction, but that's for another video. But this idea of the game group being defined as such really gives an opportunity for the character build to start to make sense as each player takes his role within the group and advances his personal progress within the same structure. Alrighty, so now we come down to why we're doing what we're doing, which is also known as the mission, the vision, or the quest. Now, many game masters really have been given a load of garbage over the concept of a railroad, simply because it's easy to move a story along from point A to point B to point C to point D. And by poo-pooing that or downplaying that, there are a lot of game masters who feel pressured to run sandbox adventures. And so I'm going to provide you with some mechanistic secrets right here that will help you to get past this point. When players are involved in a role-playing game, it really is a matter of your session zero conversation about what it is the players want from the game. By and large, from my personal experience in having dozens and dozens of session zero meetings with groups, almost down to the singularity. I can't verify that completely, but there are, for most cases, the desire to be part of a story bigger than themselves. Therefore, they are looking for some sort of personal mission, some personal objective that they must accomplish along their way. They want to have an idea of a vision that tells them what they are trying to accomplish, or they want to be spoon-fed or hand-fed, if you will, a series of quests or adventures that will take them from where they are to where they want to become. And even in those episodes that are serialized or even singular, one-shot adventures, the idea is that each of these subsequent adventures after each other can build the longer story out for the players and help them to accomplish their personal objectives along the way. This is really kind of important when you're talking about a new player who has never been in a role-playing game before and they aren't sure what to expect. Certainly they're going to have that transitional phase where they are looking at the physics of the game and wanting to understand what the outcomes of their choices will be and what the ramifications of dangerous actions might have on the game. And that's not of what I'm speaking. What I'm referring to here in this case is the larger mission statement of the games group. Are we intending to grow up within the mechanism, utilizing the rules for Dungeons and Dragons? That's pretty much the course that the game is set to fulfill, that you're achieving whatever the objective is along your hero's journey. And I do hear people, even as I'm saying this, there are people writing in the comments, but I don't want to have an objective and I don't want to play in that storyline. Well, granted, but that is the mechanism that the game was made for. And there are other properties out there, Shadow Dark and such like, that completely bypass that, instead are built for the one shot at a time, create an objective, finish the mission, and so on. That does not have that kind of a linear feel to it. Nonetheless, the game mechanism for Dungeons and Dragons was specifically built with that kind of a course in mind, and the very advancement processes are built into that, and we'll be getting to that in just a moment. But the idea here is that the vision of the group, by its own definition, needs to take into account the developing character of the players involved. Are they themselves going to be achieving new things and becoming more interesting individuals, or is it simply a box where they are, quote, winning or losing the individual encounters? This, of course, leads itself to the final decisions when it comes to the end tier of the characters, when you are reaching them near the paragon level or the advancement level maximums of the game. Did the players represent themselves well? Did they achieve the goals that they intended to do, or were they simply following orders throughout the entire course? This, of course, is left to you and the players, but this is really seminal to developing the characters and growing the characters week over week. Now, notice how fluidly I did that. I almost feel like a professional now. So we're talking now about the advancement of the character, and in Dungeons and Dragons, you are moving from level 1 to level 20. You are going from a plebe and an idiot and a literally unknowing individual up to the greatest and arguably most powerful seers and adventurers and warriors and clerics and whatever in your course. So the question becomes, are these advancements a GM tool or a player reward? Now, the mechanism of Dungeons & Dragons is built so that the challenge rating of the monsters, the relative value of the villainous creatures, is built so that the more powerful ones have a higher CR, and so therefore logic would be you're going to advance your persona again over time to become better to face against those incredible odds later in the game. And there should in theory always be the pressure of the player to want to advance and the pressure of the game master to need the players to advance, so that those two work together slowly to advance the campaign towards its logical conclusion. And without knowing what that conclusion is, the question becomes, how often are the players going to be in the winning column? How often do they face any real losses? Now, this is challenging because in today's world, you have to really be concerned with progressive rewards, because our culture is set up that way. In other words, the reality of the world that takes things from us when we fail is not nearly as leveraged as the idea of constant advancement. And so this staggering of your advances over time has become fundamentally the only mechanism for player reward. And so therefore you have to gauge it carefully, because if you provide it too quickly, then there are no longer any threats and the danger value of the game session is eliminated. Or on the other side of that is the fact that the players, if they are constantly being rewarded and given their due, so to speak, they no longer fear any of the dangers of the game and no longer take the story seriously, but instead begin to look at it more as high stakes chess, if you will. So then the real question becomes, what do we do with the rest of the games? If we are simply setting ourselves up for this continual advancement and we're constantly leaning the story against the framework, but we're not actually making the players have a loss value within their mechanism, how can we progress the story? So game masters will therefore lean on either the plot points or specific objectives that they want the adventurers to do. So the question becomes, are you building your plot points specifically with intention so that when you give a great and detailed description of the situation, the players take it more seriously? Or do they simply say, okay, this is something he's really talking in detail about, so this must be something that we need to either completely pay attention to or completely ignore? Because if you are nuanced enough to give them quality information on a constant basis while providing them with adequate red herrings to potentially pursue, the players are always going to be balancing these two. So then the question becomes, as a storyteller, as a person who is trying to advance my players and help them to build their character, are these subquests I'm providing them with actually improving something within their game life, or am I actually intentionally, for some reason, wasting their time? Part of this can be our own fear, because we want to keep our story going. We want to make sure the players stay involved. So we therefore set up the framework with the red herrings built into it, so if they happen to pursue them, they won't be far off course. But we can actually leave off our course advancement by pursuing these weird side packages. So it's important to remember that whatever you add to the story should have some merit to the games group in mind. Pardon me. Otherwise, you are putting them at a burden of wasted time, and your players will sense this with increasing efficiency over time, because they'll simply be able to read you more directly as you provide them with more information. So therefore, that leads to the real objective here, and the real objective is to build your story preparation regimen so that you are ready for anything on every game session. Now, this isn't always going to be the case, but as the old saying goes, you never want to let them see you sweat. So you've got to be able to present that your story is adequately prepared for. And the question then is this a necessity, or is it a burden or a hindrance? Well, the reality is that if you are building a red herring, you want to build enough credibility into it so that the players will feel the weight of it and have to weigh themselves whether it's going to be something they want to pursue or it's going to have with it purpose. And that's the reason why I'm using, I finally got to the right screen. Purpose is here for a reason. And the point is that after this video, at the end of this video, you're going to want to put the name Purpose down in the comments to show that you watched the video to the end. And we're not quite there yet, but the idea here is that Purpose is the time avatar. And so he is representative of how many times things are important in your game, and having a solid story prep gives your players something solid to push against for their advancement. A good story leads to a great experience because your players feel the magnitude of the scene and get a solid foothold on what's going on within the story, and therefore all the story prep in the world, if done properly, does add to the story's benefit and is in no way ever a hindrance to the story. You will never go wrong if you have a good, bound together and collected game session for your players. Okay, so then now we're gonna circle back. You're at the beginning of a story. Your players are wanting to get information. You've got a multi-week, possibly multi-month, or even multi-year campaign in mind. You're ready to start the players off down the primrose path, so to speak, to gather that information. So how much of it do you provide them through exposition, and how much detail do you place on each element in the story? And this is a really great question, because when you are telling a good story, it's far more important that the players are shown the elements than for you to tell them. And so less is more when it comes to exposition. It allows the players to fill in the blanks. It allows the players to explore what might be compared to giving them what is. And the more you do this, the deeper the players' appreciation of the game will be included. Players that are in my current sessions are completely aware of several primary storylines, but they also are greatly and broadly versed in the things that happen on the sidelines and in the gaps between. And the real key to an effective red herring is for there to be enough meat on its bones that the players can actually chew and gnaw on it while they are progressing down a different course, so they can be thinking about multiplicities of directions, the possibilities, the difference of going to Potiphar compared to going to Florin will make a world's difference in terms of their outcome, but how they choose to get there will be the course they chose. And it's really important to provide them with just enough information to let them make those decisions and to therefore pursue the course they want you to exposit, but not do so by telling them, because the more you flat out give them the information, number one, they're less likely to believe it because they haven't experienced it. They are more likely to challenge it because they haven't experienced it. And the idea here is that the very mechanics that advance a character's development, how you help a character to build and become more, is by giving them opportunities to test themselves, challenge their beliefs, and discover the truth of the world. Alrighty, and so now we come to the Gandalf moment. This is the essence of character building. It comes down to the heart of the matter. And it comes down to that early statement in Lord of the Rings when he comes running in a hushed voice, says to Frodo, "Is it secret? Is it safe?" Well, the questions here have to be different than that, because the heart of the matter in a role-playing game is, was it helpful? Was it fun? And if you can get the players to answer those questions, then you're giving the players exactly what they need to make the game theirs and drive the story towards its ultimate conclusion of each of them being more than they were when they sat down. I want to thank you for being here for this a rather intensive and exhaustive conversation. And I do have to ask the questions. How do you progress in your stories? Is it a chase of experience points? Is it an extended exposition of all of the pieces of a story that needs to be discovered? Are you playing a series of murder mysteries and conundrums rather than fight scenes? Or are you simply that, a time-slogged group of intrepid adventurers that kick the doors down, kill the monsters, and take their loot? Tell me a little bit about it, and we'll pursue this later. Now, I did mention Purpurus in the picture, and I want you to put that down in the notes so that I'll know that you were here until the end. And if you do that, then you will be getting a particularly special message in the beginning of our next video. I will put up the Purpurus image, and then I will give you a key stage Easter egg for the world of Nikos to help you not only become more in your own campaign, but to get an understanding of where we're going within the world of Nikos. I want to thank you for your time being here. I am Jonathan Albin. We record 5 times a week, so hopefully you're looking for great information on how to become a better game master and to have more fun in your games. Until the next time, as my grandfather would say, go play.